We do need smart defense. We do need to prioritize. We do need to find ways for nations who can't afford a full spectrum military to specialize in a sensible way, with NATO being the coordinator, so that we end up with all the capabilities we need, with less redundancy, and with more effectiveness and more solidarity at the end of the process. It is going to be very difficult. While there have been success stories over the years in multinational cooperation and in getting the nations to kind of do a sensible division of labor when they can't all do the same things, more often than not, each nation wants to hedge its bets and be self-reliant. And in an alliance with a shrinking resource base, we really do need to do things in a conceptually different way. But I don't underestimate the difficulties. If we're going to share the work among different national industries, that runs up against domestic pressures from parliaments who want to keep all the business at home. It raises questions of trust. If we pool our resources and collectively purchase some capability, will it be available to one nation if another nation disagrees with the mission? And of course, just bureaucratic inertia. People have been doing things the old-fashioned way for decades. So just changing the way you do business is always hard in in militaries, in civilian bureaucracies. Sovereignty is going to be a sensitive issue because NATO is not like the European Union, an institution in which countries pool their sovereignty. Each nation retains full sovereignty. But I think that if smart defense is going to work, then nations will need to voluntarily agree to coordinate more than they have in the past. They'll need to present their plans for defense restructuring, for budget cuts, before they've made irrevocable decisions, and listen to their allies, listen to the NATO professionals if they recommend a different approach. Instead of continuing to invest in tanks, cut the tank force and invest more in fighter jets or in surveillance drones or in mine countermeasures of ships. There's a lot of capabilities NATO needs, and nations need to really think about what's best for the alliance and not just what's best for their country. Well, I think one of the exciting parts of the alliance over the last 20 years has been the increasing involvement of partners in our operations, in our political consultations, and I think that the success of smart defense will be enhanced if we can find ways for partners to literally plug and play as part of these new multinational initiatives. I think there'll be a limit to how far the partners' involvement can go. Namely, when it comes to collective defense, only allies have that responsibility under Article 5 of the Washington Treaty. And I think we can't depend on non-allies. It would be asking too much of them, but it would also be asking too much of allies who may feel vulnerable to expect that the partners would be part of the Article 5 mission. But I think so many of the missions that NATO is likely to be called upon to perform in the future will be out-of-area missions relating to threats of terrorism, proliferation, regional stability in Central Asia, in the post-2014 Afghanistan situation. All these things are areas where bringing the partners in can add capability and can add political legitimacy to what NATO does. So I'm very hopeful that the doors will be wide open to involvement of partners in smart defense. I think that if it's going to work, it probably has to be more top-down than bottom-up. I mean, the actual execution of the programs will be carried out by the headquarters here in Brussels with our defense planning process, which sometimes gets a bad name because it is a cumbersome process, but I think it is the means by which allies sit around the same table, critique one another's defense plans, try to come up with a rational division of labor, set ambitious goals for countries, and then try to hold them to account. So we want to use that process. But I think that without the top-down pressure from political leaders, heads of state and government, defense ministers, there's a danger that the momentum that we're beginning to see could dissipate. So we're thinking of how can we connect capitals on a continuing basis to the work that happens here in Brussels, so it doesn't just become another NATO committee whose work takes place. The results are safely ignored in capitals and business as usual continues. If that's what this all leads to, it would be a tremendous disappointment. Well, I think NATO's future will never hinge on any one program or initiative. And NATO, of course, is too important to fail, I think, for all of its member states, and indeed for its partners, who now increasingly see NATO as a guarantor of their security and stability. But NATO's credibility does ultimately depend on having credible military capabilities. We're a political military alliance, but without the military capabilities underpinning the organization, our political leverage will be far less. So it is vitally important. I wouldn't go as far as saying it's make or break, but it really is now a very critical challenge for the alliance that it must meet by the end of this decade to deliver the capabilities to fulfill the strategy that we all dutifully adopted at the Lisbon Summit 2 years ago.